All right, there we go. Hey, how's it going, everybody? So, been a while since I did one of these Hangouts. Let me see. Let me make sure I have all my settings right. Yep, looks like it. Okay, good. There's a switch. So, hopefully you all can hear me. So let's see. I sent invites out to my Patreons. So, hey, Stu, I don't know if you're still in the chat, but if you want to join, let me know. Let me see. I sent the invites out. There we go. So, yeah, just thought didn't really have a topic. I was thinking maybe we could talk about Samhain since it's coming up. And I often don't do a lot of I don't talk about a lot of like seasonal things and you know all the typical witchy stuff that people talk about on YouTube. I don't know. I just feel like there's just so much out there. I don't know what I can really add to it. But you know, sometimes also when times of the year come around like this, like a holiday or something, I think it's interesting to kind of talk about it and see how people celebrate it, and if they even do celebrate it. I always found that to be sort of an interesting question for people because I know that you know, not everybody practices Wicca or Druidism. And I know that there's a lot of people out there who practice a form of witchcraft, but they don't necessarily have, they don't consider it to be a religion. They consider it to be more of, you know, like a practice. So I'm always curious, okay, so if they are a witch, but they don't really, I mean, do they celebrate Samhain? Do they celebrate any of the Sabbats? And if they do, why? What's the point? I mean, if you're, I guess maybe if you just want to do it, sure. But I mean, I don't really see the point if you're not really a quote unquote, you know, religious witch. And I don't think there's anything right or wrong about that. It's just something that I'm curious about. You know, I mean, for me, it's very part of my practice. So, you know, celebrating Samhain or Beltane or Lunasa or Imbolc is, you know, it's just, it's part of my path. But for example, somebody who maybe just practices it as a craft, I don't know. I mean, do they follow those holidays? Or, you know, I mean, I'm always curious about that, you know. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just really curious about it. Maybe I'll have an opportunity to talk with somebody about that someday, or maybe somebody out there will do a video on that. I think that would be interesting. I don't really see too many videos about like the history of various people's practices, where it comes from, and you know, I really wish I would see more videos like that. I think it's really fascinating to find the history of things. Let me see who is in the chat. Aramai, hello, how's it going? Stu, hey, how's it going? Pixie Doo, hey Pixie Doo, hey Rays, how's it going? Hey Shane, how's it going? What's this topic of discussion? Well, it's a Patreon hangout, so I sent invites out to my Patreons, but the topic is talking about the season of Samhain, which is coming up. So that's what we're talking about, like how people celebrate it and the various ways that people may or may not celebrate it. So that's what we're talking about. Samhain is one of those interesting things where it's not really it's a season. It comes from the Irish Gaelic, meaning the end of winter. Sorry, the end of summer. That's what it means. And and it even goes all the way back to the Caligny calendar, which is what, like 4,000? How old is the Caligny calendar? Shoot, I can't remember exactly the date that they have it. But this time of this year is called Samonios, and it means the end of summer. So it's really interesting. This is one of those holidays that goes pretty pretty far back. Yes, it's how we sacrifice and raise zombies. But in the Caligny calendar, which I unfortunately don't know the date of, the complete like 6 months opposite of it, of Samhain, is Gi Ammonios, which means the end of winter. And there's also in Irish Gaelic, there's a term for there's the end of the season, the end of winter is Gi, something with a G. It's very similar to the spelling. And obviously the name of, oh shoot, what is the name of the month? I can't remember the name of the month, but it's just interesting there. So there's linguistically, there's a lot of, there's those two seasons go pretty far back. I don't see the same linguistic roots or linguistic following of the Proto-Indo-European languages going from the P Celtic and the Q Celtic for Lunisod and Imbolc, which is kind of interesting. I wish I could find out more information about those. But as for Samonios and Gi Ammonios, it goes pretty far back in the Proto-Indo-European language, which obviously is the, if you look at the languages of many European cultures, the Proto-Indo-European tongue is like the root or the trunk of those languages. And then you have, you have the Germanic languages, Slavic languages, and then you have the Q Celtic and the P Celtic that branch off from that. And P Celtic is like your Welsh and your Cornish, and Q Celtic is the like Scots Gaelic, Irish Gaelic, Manx, etc. So linguistically, it's really interesting. You can see a lot of similarity between names for seasons and stuff. Let me see. Anyone know anything about sun magic? Let me see. It's working now. Tetris while I listen. Anyone know anything about sun magic? Well, I don't know, Artyan. What do you mean by what is sun magic? I don't exactly know what that is. Is that like specifically geared towards the sun or somehow focused on it? I mean, what would you describe it as? Say, I sent invites out to my Patreons. I always have a hard time inviting them because, let me see if I see anybody on Twitter. Ah, shoot. Why is that there? Let me see. I mean, people call on the sun or sun gods. Well, maybe. I don't know. Artyan, I don't know. I could try to answer that question if I knew more about what exactly you mean by it. Let's see. Okay, so Samhain. What are some of the ways that people have celebrated Samhain that we know of? I mean, there's a lot of the traditions that we have that are celebrated on Halloween or All Hallows Eve. They're more Catholic celebrations. The dressing up in costumes. Well, that might not be just Catholic, but that comes from guising and mumming and guising. And then trick-or-treating comes from souling, when people in the Middle Ages used to go around and get soul cakes and pray for the people who are in purgatory before the church decreed that people did not need to pray for the souls of people in purgatory. They had purgatory for like a couple hundred years, and then the Catholic Church was like, oh, you know what? We read the Bible. Oops, our bad. There is no purgatory. So it's now heretical to talk about purgatory. There's only heaven and hell. That's it. So that quickly went out of style. But you'll still find, if you ever go do a Google search on soul cakes, you'll find a lot of great recipes for soul cakes. They're usually spicy. There's usually cinnamon in them, raisins. You know, it's usually kind of like a spicy cake, which is nice. Let me see. Okay, so what do you mean though? I mean, what do you mean though? It's like solar energy in the magic space. The seasonal holidays are solar in nature for the most part. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Especially the winter solstice and the summer solstice, especially in Europe, in the European well, I don't know, European tribes, I guess would be the best way to describe them. But this is talking about like pre-Celtic cultures. The people who built like Stonehenge and a lot of the other stone structures throughout Europe, a lot of them are aligned to the winter and summer solstice. So those were definitely known as times for planting and harvesting. So they were very important times of the year to be able to mark. And especially Stonehenge, there was a great documentary on PBS recently, which is really interesting, talking about the various stages that Stonehenge went through. Obviously, Stonehenge was built by the native British peoples and not the Celtic people, but still, it's really interesting. But we don't see too many, at least I have not come across too much information going back in Celtic history or linguistic history about the winter solstice or the summer solstice. So it's really interesting that that definitely Samhain and Beltane were the two big ones. And the winter solstice and summer solstice, not so much. Although, especially in Ireland, there's all kinds of places that are aligned, especially to the winter solstice. Let me see who else. Let me see. Talking about like how you would use regular magic or draw upon the earth for energy, could you use the sun instead? I guess so. I mean, it really depends upon how you view things. You know, I don't use the earth as a way to draw energy upon, but I do use it to ground energy. The sun can be used in, I guess, in that sense, but I've never done it. But I could imagine how some people could perceive it that way. A lot of people perceive the sun and the moon to be energetic elements, and then use those elements to energize whatever it is that they want to do. Stones, water, whatever. I don't buy into that. So, you know, I'm not the best person to ask about that. My practice is rather grounded, I guess is the best way to describe it. It's called R&B group. Weren't Soul Cakes an R&B group from the 60s? I think they were, yes. Their hit album was Purgatory or Hell. Who are you going to call? So, yeah. But I mean, it's really interesting, some of the celebrations that have come down to us today and how they've changed and adapted. But America really took a hold of, especially like Christmas and Halloween and Easter. We really took those holidays and really commercialized them and made them into what they are today. So America, that's sort of our fault. And then like especially the Christmas celebration. The Christmas celebration was really big here in America, and then it even spread over to Europe, back over to Europe, and then suddenly people were buying, you know, Christmas trees and putting up Christmas trees, and now it's a seasonal thing there. But back in Victorian England, they didn't set up Christmas trees. That was an American tradition that got. It's funny. It's kind of like we took the Christmas celebrations from Europe, and then we mixed them together, and then we kind of created our own, and then they got adapted by people in Europe. So it was kind of like an interesting way of evolution for those celebrations. And Halloween's are pretty much the same thing. There's a lot of traditions that are kind of blended together. And made into its own sort of unique holiday. And now people over in Europe dress up in costumes and go trick-or-treating, which is something that definitely was unique to America. Okay, glad it isn't serious. Drive by and she caught a stray bullet, not life-threatening, old, but I guess. But yeah, that's a shame. Sorry about that, Talon. Winged Dancer. Take care. So yeah. Yeah, that's the shame about violence, is that innocent people always get caught in the crossfire. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, is that the gang violence does spread, and it does affect innocent people. But yeah, so I mean, it's Samhain and Halloween are two very interesting holidays which have roots together, but essentially they're two separate holidays. You know, Halloween started out as All Martyrs Day, and it got moved from May 13th to November the 1st and became All Saints Day back in 700 AD, and then eventually the night before All Saints Day became All Hallows Eve, and then Halloween. So October 31st became Halloween, and then November 1st became All Saints Day. But Samhain was always a celebration of the end of summer. There's differences between those two celebrations, which I think a lot of people get confused about. The Great Pumpkin. Oh, you mean Stingy Jack? Yes. Yeah, really. Yeah, well, the story of Stingy Jack is interesting. But yeah, so jack-o'-lanterns started out as turnips. They would hollow out turnips or beets, and those started out as jack-o'-lanterns. And then obviously in America, somebody figured out that they could hollow out a pumpkin and put a candle in it, make a jack-o'-lantern head out of it. And it became a big thing. But yeah, in Europe, they didn't have pumpkins or a lot of squashes. Like a lot of gourd squashes they didn't have. They were native. The potatoes and squashes and pumpkins were native to the Americas. They were not native to Europe. So people think that, oh, well, they would hollow out potatoes. It's like, no, they didn't hollow out potatoes. They didn't have potatoes. And one of the reasons why they had the Great Famine in Ireland was because they invested all their money into those crops and believed that they would be able to live off the potatoes and you know, pay their landlords the rest of their money. And then when the potato crop failed such a mass scale, there was nothing else to eat. And so then we had the Great Famine of Ireland, which I think almost nearly 1/3 of the entire population died, starved to death. And the thing is that landlords, people who had the money, could have fed them. And a lot of orphanages took in a lot of people. Let me see. America does bastardize holidays. Yes, they do bastardize holidays. Missed the Charlie Brown reference. You were thinking way too educationally. No, Rays, I didn't miss the Charlie Brown celebration. No, I mean, I know the Great Pumpkin, but there is the story of Stingy Jack, and I thought, and it just occurred to me when I heard that, or when I read that. You are one of the cool kids. You are thinking way too educationally. Yeah, the Great Pumpkin. Okay. I don't know. There was nothing I could really do with the Great Pumpkin. All right. Well, let's see. I had this hangout here for my Patreons. Let me see. I guess maybe I'll let it go for another 13 minutes and then probably just wrap it up. Let me see. I guess I could take questions from people. Anybody got questions? Let's see. Ray's Village says Stingy Jack is a cool one, though. The one that wasn't allowed in heaven, but hell didn't want him either. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was what was the name of it? There was a YouTube channel that I recently started watching that really got into the story of Stingy Jack. But yeah, he ended up tricking the devil a couple of times, and then when he died, the devil basically promised that the devil would not accept Jack into hell, and but he was also kind of a crook and a weasel and sort of conned people, even conned the devil. So when he died, he wasn't good enough to go into heaven, and obviously the devil wouldn't allow him in hell, and so the devil gave him a hollowed out turnip and threw a lump of coal in it, and Stingy Jack had to wander between heaven and hell, purgatory, for the rest of for eternity, if you follow that story. Not Halloweeny, but how is the air quality up in SF? It's still pretty smoky here in Santa Rosa. Yeah, it's the air quality here in SF has been improving a lot. A couple of nights ago, well, several nights ago, when we first had the fires in Northern California, I could smell it in the air. I thought that at first I'd smelled it. I was concerned. I thought maybe there was, because it was too warm to be having a fireplace. And then I thought maybe somebody was having a fireplace, and then I realized, turned on the news, and there was the fires going on. But yeah, the air quality was really bad for quite a few days. Like, you would see people walking around with masks on. But the air quality's been getting much better. I haven't been like when I do my daily rituals, I wasn't using any incense because I didn't want to, add to the crappy quality of the air. Let me see. Bop. Chaos Candle. Hello, Chaos Candle. Hello, Jinzo. How's it going, Jinzo? How do you feel about Me Too, or is it too soon for you? I think it was a good hashtag. I think it was a way to build unity with people. The thing that bothered me, one of the things that bothered me about some of the hashtags that I saw was the assumption that it was only something that affected women. Men are victims of sexual assault, sexual molestation, but it is something that is completely ignored in our society, and it really pisses me off. So I didn't have any, I think it was a great thing. I think it was a way to build unity with survivors of sexual assault. I think it was really good. Unfortunately, I think that a lot of people ran along the assumption that it only affected women. And like I said, it affects men too. Men are raped, men are abused, men are molested. But again, we don't hear about it. It's not okay to talk about, or it's just not as widely recognized as it is with women. And yeah, people in Hollywood are slimy. And I don't understand why what's his name, Weinstein, has been able to get away with this for so long. There's so many famous actresses, Angelina Jolie, who have known this for years. Years. We're talking like 30 years, and nobody spoke up. That's some responsibility that those actresses need to take. If you are allowing a man who is a sexual predator, who is in a position of power like that, and you have this much clout in Hollywood, and you are still too afraid to speak up, I'm sorry, but that's you have to take some responsibility for every single woman who was put into a sexual position like that after that fact. You have to take some responsibility. And I don't think that a lot of those actresses are accepting that responsibility. They're suddenly saying, oh, yeah, it happened to me. And, oh, it was terrible. It's awful. He's such a horrible person. Yeah, he was a horrible person who was allowed to thrive. And the way that he acted with a lot of these women was he believed that he could just get away with it. So he was running around, with a gold card thinking he could do whatever he wants. And that responsibility has got to be shared by the people who were silent for all those years. So, yeah. So, short answer, I think it was a great, I think it was a good hashtag. Let me see. Did California really add a new gender for license, or is that fake news? That's a good question, Ray's. I don't know about that. Obviously, everybody who I've known who's trans, they usually, if they once they begin to identify as the sex that they feel most comfortable as, they change their license to male or female or whatever there is. Now, if somebody wants to remain sort of gender fluid, I don't know. I don't know about that. I haven't been keeping up on that. I don't know if they added a third. I mean, it doesn't really surprise me if they did. Let me see. More than one man on my Facebook said me too, and there is no reason male survivors should not be invited into that campaign. Yeah, there was somebody on my personal Facebook who said that they were looking for women only. So I didn't really get into that hashtag again because I felt like it was for women only. But that could have been only the circle that I run with. It could have been, once I go outside of that circle, it could have been open to anybody. Like I have been harassed, followed home, creeped on, but there's nothing like assault. Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it's still kind of creepy to be followed home. Since he didn't do it, they might be after his money. Yeah, Jinzo, I don't know. There's so many people who have a story. One of the things that kind of bothers me is that some of the stories that I've heard, I'm trying to remember specifically who it was. There was an Italian model who broke the case, who actually took it to the New York Police Department, and she actually got a recording of him, and this is what kind of broke the case. But he propositioned to her and put her in a position that she felt very uncomfortable with, and she sort of refused. But there were some people who gave in, quote unquote, gave in, and were consensual. I mean, in a court of law, what they did was consensual, even though that maybe in the back of their mind they're thinking, well, I'll just sleep with them because I don't want to ruin my career or whatever. That's still consensual. In a court of law, that's consensual sex, even if you were, not into it, quote unquote. But there were some women who he actually sexually imposed himself, pushed himself on it. And this Italian model was one of them, and she's the one who broke the case. She took it. She did the smart thing and actually went to the police department and filed a police report. None of those other actresses who are suddenly coming out of the woodwork, none of them did anything like that. So actually, that's not true. I should back it up. There were some people who did, but they settled out of court. So they said, okay, well, we'll give you $100,000 and, you know, you shut up. And so they did that. But again, if your principles are worth, if your principles and understanding, like they did in Hollywood, that all these women are being sexually assaulted by a man, and you put a price tag of $100,000 or $300,000 or however much you put on the value of someone's sexual, you know, this type of thing. I mean, and that's your, I don't know. I just think that Weinstein is responsible for his actions, but a lot of these other people need to take some responsibility for allowing him to flourish. Let me see. It's weird that all these people are coming out at once. Yeah, well, yeah, because I mean, he was doing this for a long time, like 20 or 30 years. So it is kind of surprising that so many people are coming out of the woodwork, but he did this a lot. I mean, this was not like a one-time thing or, you know, one-off thing. This was something that happened over and over and over and over again. And the more power that he got, the more bold he got. And, you know, looks like we will be torn to pieces by the media. I mean, that is shitty, but it really can be terrifying to come forward. Yes, it can be terrifying to come forward, but yeah, but it's okay. If you have an automobile and the brakes are getting shoddy, it's your responsibility to fix those brakes. I mean, this is kind of a loose analogy, but if there's somebody who's a known sexual predator and he or she is allowed to flourish, you have to take some responsibility for that. You know, I'm just saying, you have a responsibility to say something, to speak up and do something about it. I mean, that's even in a court of law, if you are aware of a crime and you allow it to happen, you become an accessory to that crime. So if you know the burglary is happening and you sort of not really don't do anything about it, but if you participate in it, like let's say you drive a getaway car in a bank robbery, even though you didn't rob the bank, you were just the getaway driver, you're still an accessory to that crime because you are aware of it. Even though you may not have gone into the bank and pulled out a gun and threatened people, you were still responsible for it. So it's sort of the same thing with a sexual assault. Not a sexual assault. The way that he was using his power, his position of power and influence to get people to sleep with him. People knew that this was happening. You know, people were joking about it. People knew that this was happening and nobody said anything. And it's not like this happened over 1 year, 2 years. It happened for many years, 20 years. It's crazy. But anyhow, I don't want to take up all the time talking about that. Obviously, they show with MJ, people thought he was guilty with no proof, and he was found not guilty so many times that people still think he did it. Yeah, and I think Jinzo, exactly, and I think you're referring to Michael Jackson. Yeah, and in the case of Michael Jackson, I don't think a lot of his fans wanted to believe that. You know, we also tend to put people up on pedestals and believe that they are, you know, saints and good people, and we project a lot onto our quote unquote archetype heroes, you know, our mythological characters of today. So when we hear about things like, you know, Michael Jackson being accused of pedophilia, a lot of people don't want to believe it. You know, they will go to his defense despite the preponderance of evidence that is used against him. You know, people just say, no, that's not true. Michael Jackson's a good person, you know, and they'll just kind of keep repeating that almost like a mantra. But yeah, I mean, if the evidence is there, I don't care, you know, how famous you are. It should be investigated. So yeah. So all right. Well, none of my Patreons came, so that's all right. I posted it in my. Who knows? Maybe nobody was available. Maybe they just don't want to hang out with me. So yeah, so I think I'm going to wrap this up. And I think pretty much that's about it. Oh, I do have a video coming out on Friday. My apologies that my video schedule has been kind of wonky, I guess is the best way to describe it. But yeah, I do have a video coming out on Friday. So look forward to that. Again, my apologies. I'm going to try to step it up and maybe do 2 a week. Just my own personal life has just been rather hectic, you know, and I just haven't been having much time to get down and start working on videos. But I will try to do better. So, all right. Thank you all so much. Have a good night and blessed be.